Welcome to Happy Talks with Dr. Alice and Donovan. Dr. Alice Fong is a holistic naturopathic doctor and founder of Amor de Soi Wellness. And Donovan Jensen is a software engineer and founder of HowToHappy.com. Together, they're out to cause more happiness in the world.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Happy Talks. My name is Dr. Alice, and this is my awesome co-host, Donovan. And today we are talking about shyness. So, Donovan, what are your initial thoughts when it comes to shyness?
Yeah, so the very first thing that comes to mind is sort of how shyness and introversion can get sort of locked up together. And I think there's actually a very clear distinction that's important. And the distinction would be introversion is sort of like the way that you rebuild your energy, right? Which is low stimulation environments. Shyness, on the other hand, is more of like a social component and how you interact with other people. So I feel like you can, for example, get your energy built back up by being alone without necessarily being nervous around other people or unwilling to sort of like talk to people or not good at sort of opening conversations or whatever else. So I think that's the first thing that comes to mind for me, is to just pull those two things apart. As one is a sort of a way that you revitalize yourself, and one is kind of the way that you interact with other people, or at least sort of that like initial energy you bring to interactions.
Yeah, I would concur with that idea. I kind of view it as shyness as more of a quality that you can overcome versus introversion is sort of like an innate quality that you're kind of born with to some extent. Like I see my niece and nephew and, same exact parents, complete opposite personalities. Like my niece is super introverted and she always has been. And then my nephew is super outgoing and extroverted. But, even though my niece is introverted and she needs like that time to recharge and need some alone time, she definitely also had, as part of that shyness, that she has to some extent like massively overcome. Like she used to have like serious social anxiety, which I kind of, mirrors shyness to some extent, where you're just like uncomfortable around other people. And I actually was considered very shy when I was a child too. But I think, certain things in my life kind of helped me overcome it, like being a waitress. It's like you have to kind of force to talk to people. It's part of the job. And then also getting into social partner dancing was another way for me to overcome it in time. And with my niece, she's done like dancing, and I think that's helped a lot. She's gone to a child psychologist, and that's helped a lot. So I think it's something that's more malleable than introversion.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think you brought up something that I do think is more tightly coupled, which is shyness and social anxiety, right? I think those two things are maybe variations of degree of the same problem, right?
Yeah.
Like where shyness is like the less powerful version of social anxiety. But I think what you mentioned about it being sort of something you can overcome is also true, in the sense that having sort of shyness, at least from my experience and what I've seen, is sort of something that builds up from one of two ways. Either you don't have the tools that you need to navigate sort of just conversations with strangers very well. At least that's historically what it was for me when I used to be very shy. Or the other thing is, because you're introverted, and I think this is why these things get tied together, but being an introvert and then having experiences that sort of feel uncomfortable for one reason or another, maybe it's just simply draining your energy, then you start to develop sort of this pattern of like, oh, whenever I have these social interactions, I start feeling drained, so I don't want to engage in them. I don't want to have more of them. And then they become sort of linked, but it's more that like one can cause the other, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it will. At least that's the way that I've experienced it for myself.
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with that it can be separate. And I know introverted people that can actually interact with people pretty well and naturally, and upon interaction, you might not even realize they're introverted. potentially, but it's more about like, perhaps the setting, maybe they're do better in smaller group settings versus really large ones. Maybe it depends on the people they're around. Because I think ultimately, even introverts to some extent need some form of connection. Like they perhaps need more alone time to recharge and regroup, but I think there's still a desire for like a connection, especially if like a deeper connection, the less superficial kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that aligns with sort of some of what I've seen as well. I also
Mhm.
think, you most commonly see shyness in people with introversion, but I think
Mhm.
you can see uh, shyness with people who are extroverted as well.
Yeah.
And it just may not take exactly the form that you typically see, but like if there is someone that is extroverted and they are, let's say, dealt a hand of like growing up with a lot of negative social influences, right? Where like,
Mhm.
yeah, they really enjoy engaging with people and wanting to talk to people, and they enjoy higher stimulation, and that recharges them, but their environment just like keeps beating them down.
Yeah.
um you can develop some of those same shyness sort of mechanisms just because it's like, you either don't know how to navigate social
Mhm.
settings, or when you have tried, it's been negative, whether or not you
Mhm.
have the tools.
Yeah.
um I've seen that a couple times with people who enjoy sort of that higher stimulation stuff, but
Mhm.
they don't do it as much in social settings because they've had some sort of background like that. And I think that's what I would call like sort of that pairing of shyness. That's what it sort of looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I think with shyness, just because I've had my own experience with it, I realized like one of the motivating factors for me to overcome my shyness was the fact that my parents would say that I was shy, and it really annoyed me for whatever reason. I didn't like that I was shy. And I don't, it's kind of hard to say because I was definitely shy as a child, but I don't know if I was introverted or not because I didn't take personality tests as a child, but I've taken it plenty of times as an adult, and I always come out on the extroverted side. And I was like, was I introverted and then just learned to become extroverted, or was I always extroverted but I was also shy? And that's kind of hard to distinguish. And I just learned how to interact with people and realize that was actually something that kind of enlivens me to some extent. But it took some time. And I'd be curious, like, since it sounds like you've had that experience too of shyness as a child, like, what were things that helped you overcome it?
Yeah, so let me start with why I think I had it to begin with, and then I'll move into sort of the way I work through it. But
Yeah.
for me, like I had the same thing where people be like, "Oh, he's shy. He's a shy person." But
Yeah.
I also was in a lot of situations where I just sort of felt uncomfortable, like
Mm-hmm.
the way the conversation was going or the way things opened up. Um, going back to one of our other episodes, like growing up in a very religious community,
Yeah.
there were a lot of conversations where I was just like, I don't necessarily feel like I'm being shy, but I don't
Yeah.
feel comfortable contributing to this conversation. Like I don't
Mhm.
have anything meaningful to say that won't cause some sort of argument. So I don't
Yeah.
have anything to say.
Hmm.
So I think that those sort of patterns developed because I wasn't comfortable in a lot of those
Hmm.
situations. And
Yeah.
all of that is to say, I I still actually probably think some people would look at me or talk to me or consider me shy. But the thing that
Hmm.
changed is I now feel much more confidence about speaking the things I
Hmm.
want to when I want to.
Hmm.
So previously, part of it was me being worried about like, oh, how am I coming off? Are people going to see me as
Right.
like too shy or too quiet or whatever else? And nowadays, I don't have nearly as much of that running around in my head, which has helped a
Mm-hmm.
lot, even if my conversation style hasn't changed much.
Right.
But the other thing is, I did spend a lot of time since I was a child, sort of understanding more of the nuances around communication and having a dialogue.
Hmm.
And specifically, we've talked about this before, but if I need to make conversation or want or whatever, being able to
Hmm.
ask more questions, more open-ended questions, get other people to open up more,
Yeah.
which is sort of ironic because by learning those few tools, people think I'm less shy, even though I don't feel like in a lot of circumstances I'm actually talking any more than I used to. It's just
Mhm.
instead I add a couple questions in, and then the other person has a lot of space to talk. I'm still
Mm.
not talking, but the conversation feels a lot better.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think you make a really good point in that kind of the context of the environment that you're in can influence like your how comfortable you feel in said environment, and that can make a difference of if you're more socially engaged versus not. Because I think that was definitely a factor, and I think it still is for me to some extent. Like, if I'm at a party and there's nobody I know, I'm uncomfortable essentially. But if it's a party and there's like, more than 50% of the people I know, then I'd be like, yeah, this is great and awesome. So I think it does make the difference. One of the thoughts that I just recalled with the shyness part, I think one of the things that I would do is kind of like seek out the people that I was most comfortable with, and
Mhm.
yeah, just like, and I have some to some extent learned how to interact with people that are strangers, but there's still a somewhat of a discomfort for me even in my late 30s essentially, that I can make do. But oh, I just remembered the other situation that brings still some discomfort for me is that I can carry on a casual conversation with a stranger. That's not an issue typically at this point, but when there's like a group conversation and then there's someone that's like way more extroverted than me and that like dominates the conversation, that always, I don't even know how to like interject, or I don't even want to interject because I'm like, they're just taking up all the space and I'm like, well, and so then I kind of feel like I'm being shy, or some people say that I'm quiet, and I'm like, I don't feel like that's the case, but that just person was just louder. So I don't know if you've been in that type of situation too.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was talking about in terms
Mhm.
of those kinds of things used to bother me more. And
Yeah.
now I haven't necessarily changed anything except for
Mhm.
my the way that I perceive myself in those circumstances. So the only thing that's really changed is my perception of myself in those circumstances. So like now if I feel 100% the same way. I'm in a
Yeah.
group, someone's talking, they're taking up all the space. I don't really have anything to say because if I
Mhm.
do, I will say it.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's usually the conversation is not engaging enough for me to want to like
Yeah.
jump in, or it's
Mhm.
just not down my interest. Anyway,
Mhm.
um I'm just not as worried about it as I used to be.
Yeah.
And that somehow allows me to, when I do have something to say or do find a place to interject, which is not
Mhm.
often in those kinds of situations,
Mhm.
I can say it like fully confidently. And it's interesting to see how people have responded to that as I've changed.
Mhm.
Because when I used to be more nervous about how I was coming across, I feel like I would straight up get ignored more often. Like it
Mhm.
just like the things I was saying wouldn't be heard. And I don't
Right.
know if my volume was lower or if
Yeah.
just like my presentation or
Mhm.
like what, because I wasn't on the other side of the dynamic. But
Mhm.
it has been interesting for me to see that like now that I'm more comfortable owning the space I want to own, as
Mhm.
opposed to uncomfortably trying to own some sliver of space that I'm not sure I want,
Right.
the outcomes are a lot smoother.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. It makes the difference for sure. Just thinking of other types of situations where, it depends on if I'm another situation I thought of was like if I'm sort of like leading the group potentially, and to some extent, because I have led like group events before, I do try to make it a point to make sure that there's space for everyone to get heard. And I know like then there's like other situations where I'm not technically like the leader or in charge or anything. So, and then there's that person that's like dominating the conversation. I think what I've developed over time that I think has helped me in these social situations is to kind of like be more present and aware of like, oh, is anyone feeling like left out? Because I think maybe because I have been that person many times, I'm a little more conscious to it.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting thread to open up a little bit more because I sort of have almost the opposite
Mm.
take on my experience, which is
Mhm.
like there have been a number of times where I'm quiet
Yeah.
because I want to be quiet,
Yeah.
or I don't have anything I want to say. And I really
Mm.
don't like it when it's like,
Someone's
the
like,
group or the leader or whatever is like, well, what do you want to say about this? And it's like,
yeah.
well, I would have said whatever I wanted to say.
Oh.
So it's interesting to me that
Mhm.
like we had such sort of opposite experiences. I would be
Mhm.
curious if, let's pretend that I'm running some sort of a session or something.
Yeah.
What would be the way that you would want the conversation, or like, I guess, spotlight or space opened up for you? Because we
Mhm.
might differ on that, and it might be useful for
Mhm.
people to know like what they can kind of look out for.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to be put on the spot to be like, oh, you should have a profound thought to share with the group right now, because I'll probably be anxious. But, I do appreciate when people give me the space to like, oh, did you have anything to add to the conversation? And I can decline, and I don't have an issue with declining. At this point, I think maybe in the past I might have been like, oh shit, I don't have anything to say. But I think at this point in my life, I'm like, no, I'm good. And then they move on. But I appreciate like someone creating that opening for me, because if not, I probably would be like, oh man, there was something I wanted to comment on. But now we're like way past that point in the conversation. I feel like it'd be weird to like bring it up now because we're talking about something totally different. So I appreciate when that happens, but I do realize that not everyone wants to speak up. But at the same time, I realize that there's a lot of people that may have something to say, but maybe they feel uncomfortable like interjecting like me sometimes. So yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because actually what you said, and well, I don't know, maybe I'm off, but what you said sounds similar to the way that if someone wants to single me out to give me space is the way
Hmm.
that I would prefer, which is
Hmm.
to basically see if I have anything to say as opposed
Yeah.
to trying to pull something
Right.
out. Because I've been in a lot of those situations where it's
Yeah.
like, what do you think? As opposed to
Mhm.
like, do you have
Mhm.
anything you want to add? And it seems
Right.
like a subtle difference, but like you said,
Hmm.
I don't really like being called on in general, but if I have the space to decline
Hmm.
and move on,
Yeah.
then I'm 100% like that's 100% okay and comfortable with me.
Right.
But it's those situations where it's like, oh, you're shy. Tell us what you think. And it's
Hmm.
like, I don't necessarily have anything I want to add here.
Yeah.
And then like they keep pushing for it. I don't know if you've been in those
Hmm.
circumstances, but those are the ones for me that I'm just like,
Yeah.
I'm not being shy. I just
Hmm.
don't have anything I want to tell anyone.
Yeah, totally. Kind of changing gears, I just thought of another question I'd have for you was, you know, one of my experiences that probably even still now as an adult, there's probably people that I've met that would consider me shy now. I don't consider myself shy. I think the majority of my friends wouldn't consider me shy. But it's like, and then if I find out that they think I'm shy or quiet, I might get annoyed or irritated. But at the same time, I'm like, well, I guess I didn't say a lot, so I guess it's understandable they made that assumption about me. So yeah, how would you feel if someone like, even though you might not consider yourself very shy now, how would you feel if you interacted with someone and then they like decided that you were shy in their mind and their perspective? Would you try to like change their mind about it, or you just kind of let it be?
Yeah, I don't. There was a time in the past where I probably would have fought against the label a lot
Mm-hmm.
more.
Mm-hmm.
Um, these days I don't as much because I feel like I understand the nuance for myself, and when
Yeah.
people may be using words slightly differently than me, or they may just have like a small snapshot of who I am, and that's
Mm-hmm.
what they got. So these days, I wouldn't really try to fight against it or care too much because to me, I probably in most situations am a fairly quiet person, but I don't think I'm
Mm-hmm.
shy, right?
Yeah.
Like to me, shy means like I'm nervous or
Mm.
uncertain about my ability to like take up space in a conversation.
Yeah.
And I just don't feel like that's true anymore. Other people might have a different definition, right? Other people might
Mhm.
say like quiet and shy are the same thing.
Yeah.
Like they mean the same thing to me.
Mm-hmm.
So to me having sort of, and I've talked about this a couple times, but just like more of a solid grounding for myself
Mm-hmm.
on this topic has helped me not really worry about it much anymore. Now there's still definitely times that I get social anxiety and like
Mm-hmm.
try to work through that and process that and whatever else. But all of those are about the feelings, the uncomfortable feelings I have, as opposed to any sort of perception.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I have a similar experience, and I'm glad that you made the distinction between shyness and quiet, because I definitely can relate more to quiet, because there's times where I am probably quieter than other people in the conversation. Sometimes I'm not. It really varies, but it's rare, I think, now to, at least in my own perception, to perceive myself as shy. And even though that might be how I come across to other people, and it doesn't necessarily bother me so much anymore.
Yeah, because I think, especially if it's not something that you
Mm-hmm.
have dealt with personally, it's not something that you really think too much about the nuances. So
Yeah.
that's one of the main reasons that I'm like, if it's mostly all the same bucket in their mind, then that's fine.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
if
Whatever.
if people think I'm coming across as too afraid or nervous to enter a
Mm-hmm.
conversation,
Mm-hmm.
um it's not necessarily something that I'll like chase down and fight against super hard, but that's
Yeah.
not like the perception I want to give. And like
Mm-hmm.
I said, since my internal position has changed so much, I actually externally don't get that very often anymore, because
Mm-hmm.
when I do speak, it's coming from a much more like confident, measured place, as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to in the past where I was nervous. It
Yeah.
came out in the way that I was sort of interacting with people.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest thing there, um, you sort of mentioned a little bit when you were talking about sort of jobs you've done and whatnot, but just repetitions of being forced to talk to new people
Right.
has also been probably the strongest tool for
Mm-hmm.
breaking that shyness. Um, one, in the confidence to be able to navigate conversations, but two, to also actually build the tool set. So,
Yeah.
just going back to sort of asking like ways to work through this. For me, same sort of thing. Like that stuff really melted when I forced myself to drastically increase the number of interactions I had with strangers.
Mm-hmm.
I actually did that in college before I was working at a job that made me run through a bunch of people, but just like
Mm-hmm.
forcing myself to like make eye contact with people, smile at people,
Yeah.
just like small little social cues. And the nice thing is, um, the vast majority of those are positive, or at least they have been in my
Mm-hmm.
experience. Of
Yeah.
other people's mileage may differ, but
Mm-hmm.
most of those interactions are pleasant. So like, or at least neutral. So you can sort of
Yeah.
like slowly break down that pattern of like, what if they don't like me? What if they yell at me? What if they make fun of me? What if
Mm-hmm.
and actually, as I'm saying that, the interactions as an adult are typically more measured and fair than as a
Mm-hmm.
kid, right? As a
Yeah.
kid in school, there's like a lot of bullying, a lot of mean comments, a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
not making sort of thoughtful choices about the way that they're speaking to
Right.
people. And I think that
Yeah.
actually is probably another factor that can contribute to a lot of the shyness. At least it was for me. Again, like with that like religious community background as a
Mm-hmm.
kid, I would say or think or a lot of stuff, and it
Mm-hmm.
just wouldn't land for one reason or another. So that
Right.
also sort of developed more shyness in me as I was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to unwind that with the same thing, just more repetitions of like things feeling nice.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I do see that. I think most people would consider shyness a quality that's predominantly in children versus adults, but it definitely can occur in adults as well. But I think it's like, yeah, the more interactions that we have, the more comfortable we get with the interactions with strangers. And it's not like, yeah, you don't usually die from those interactions. So you survive, and they're usually okay, or even pleasant on occasion. And yeah, you get through. But anyways, I think we covered this topic pretty well. Were there any final thoughts you had before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I just wanted to the last thing you said just brought a
Hmm.
thought to mind, which is when I was a kid,
Yeah,
I feel like I was just called shy, and then that was sort of the end of it.
right.
It would have been nicer to have sort of more support around just like
Mm,
how are you feeling? Why don't you want
Yeah.
to talk about this stuff? Like,
Mhm.
what is your experience? Because I feel like with the right circumstances and the right sort of guidance, I could have come out
Mhm.
of that a lot earlier. But I
Yeah.
was basically, just a kid and trapped in this pattern of like, yeah, a lot of times when I talk to people, the conversation just goes in a weird, awkward way that I don't like.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
I mean, I don't think that I was young at the time, but not incapable of taking the perspective of like
Yeah.
understanding some of the ideas around like context matters and who you're talking
Mhm.
to, or like
Yeah.
here are some things that you can do to
Mhm.
have the conversation go more smoothly, or like whatever
Right.
else. I just know that I spent a lot of time both uncomfortable with the situations and uncomfortable with the label, and then I had to go
Mhm.
figure it out myself.
Mm.
So the point I'm trying to make is, I guess if you have a kid or someone that you know that's shy, um,
Yeah.
it may be something to like open up the conversation a little bit more instead of just being like, oh, they're shy. Oh, well, and
Yeah.
not also be like, oh, you're shy. You have to go talk to this person and do
Right.
this thing and talk to this other person. And
Yeah.
and that may be ultimately what helps with the shyness, but like smaller steps to open up that conversation instead of just forcing things through, because I got a
Mm.
little bit of that too. I'm
Mhm.
just like, you're too shy, go do this. And then
Mhm.
it was uncomfortable, and then the conversation didn't go well because
Yeah.
I didn't have any backing tools or context or anything to figure out how to not make it unpleasant. So
Mhm.
then it would just add to that sort of pattern that I already had. And I'd be like, yep, this sucks. Like, I don't like it. I would
Confirming
like
what
to
you
continue
thought.
to stay out of this.
Right.
So that's the other thing, just that I thought of, is just if there is
Mm.
someone, probably a kid that you
Mhm.
know that needs help working through this, repetition can help, but it needs to be like framed the right way so they're actually
Yeah.
making progress and feeling like positive interactions instead of just
Right.
embedding that pattern
Forcing.
deeper.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. And I had like a very similar experience in that for me as a child, it was kind of like, oh, you're shy. And they didn't do anything about it. They didn't force me into like talking to people, but they just kind of were like, gave me the label that I didn't like and just left me to my own devices to figure it out. Which, yeah, I think looking back, it would have been nice to be like, oh, this is something you can work on if that's something you want to work on, kind of a thing. And here's some things you can do if you're wanting to grow out of this or overcome this. But anyways, I think we covered this pretty well. And that's it for today. We appreciate you. And if you appreciate us, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and help spread the happiness in the world. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please take a second to subscribe, as it really helps out a lot. If you're looking for more content, there's all sorts of information over at howtohappy.com. And if you want something a little bit more condensed and concise, I've also written the book Mindscaping, which is essentially a framework for optimizing happiness. So we'll have the link there as well. And that's all I've got. Thanks again. I'll see you next time.